everyone. Welcome to our webinar on impactful diversity, equity, inclusion, and how to do it right. We'll be hearing today from FleishmanHillard, the winners of 2021 ICCO Global Award in Championing Diversity category on their most innovative diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The award recognizes PR agencies or in-house PR teams championing diversity, inclusivity, and change within the industry. A very warm welcome to my panelists, Adrianne Smith, Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at FleishmanHillard, and Leela, I'm sorry with the pronunciation of your name, Leela State, DE&I Global Practice Lead. Welcome both of you today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm honored to be here.
Brilliant. So let's get started with the conversation and not waste any more time today at all. So Adrianne, let's start with you. You know, the tragic death of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement was a transformational, it wasn't a moment, but it was transformational, has been transformational for our society in the sense that it finally sort of galvanized Western society and businesses to look at and address systemic racism and inequity in our society. The PR and the communications industry, which is a microcosm of the whole world, has finally acknowledged that it needs to take some action. As an industry, why do you think it is important for us to champion diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because as an industry, a lot of us are still sitting on the fence, you know, doing the easy bits and leaving out the more substantial pieces that require financial commitment or time commitment. Over to you.
Well, thanks so much for the question. And I think one thing you mentioned was it being now a movement. So we moved from a moment to a movement, and that part when that moment when George Floyd was killed in front of all of us really pushed a global movement for everyone to see and have a look at some of the inequities that have been happening and that some DE&I practitioners have been witnessing for decades, more specifically in the US, where we've taken more action and have been working on for so long. But it really gave, you know, an open insider look at what is happening to communities that are often othered. So now we have full audience, full opportunity to take some amazing action. And, you know, I think for our industry in particular, it's a great time to actually be a DE&I practitioner, right? And I say that because the industry is about storytelling. We shape messages. We help to shape and develop point of views or POVs for brands and influencers. You know, we handle the strategic communications, the media relations, community relations, anything you can think about, crisis communications and public affairs. We help to influence and shape the messages that people hear and consume on a daily and regular basis. So it's really a powerful time for us, for people who have this idea of making the human connections better. And really, for me, that's what DE&I is all about. It's about the human connection work. It's a human connections business. And we really, you know, help everyone to become, even the people we work with, more credible counselors, and increase the organization's opportunity to have more cultural competency. You know, we want to be able to create people who have stronger empathy anchors. We want people to become better allies, and just for us to have more inclusive and equitable workplaces. So I think, you know, to answer that question of why is it important for us to champion equity and inclusion, it's because, you know, it's the thing to do right now. We have this key opportunity as leaders and practitioners that people are listening. We just now have to make sure that it becomes a natural fiber of what groups and organizations do on a regular basis. It's a constant state of learning. And I think as practitioners in this space, we are the right people to do it because, again, we control those messages.
Yeah, that's true. This is definitely an opportunity. Leela, do you have anything to add to this?
You're on mute, Leela.
I think communications is really a catalyst for change. So that is the real opportunity in front of us here, right? If we're doing our jobs right, I think sometimes people in my life have been surprised maybe that this is a field that I've landed in, because I've always been kind of a social impact first student and professional. And sometimes I kind of get the perplexed, how did you end up in this industry? And really for me, I think it's because I believe so much of what Adrianne was saying, which is that we have an incredible platform for impact if we use it correctly. We know one of the biggest risks in all of this work is being performative. And we do the really hard work to make sure that if companies and organizations don't have something to communicate about, that they're not communicating about it. But conversely, it's also true that you could have the best programs, intent, initiatives in the world, but if you're not communicating about them effectively, you're not realizing the full potential of those programs. So I truly believe and have seen through our work just the power of what we can do through this industry.
Yeah, I agree on that. Adrianne, so according to a recent Kantar report, progress on DEI efforts have stalled, especially in developed markets. And the report says that money is being spent largely on increasing numbers. That's the diversity piece, and not on inclusion, because it's more nebulous and difficult to track. Does that surprise you?
No, the work of, and I'll use that term again, human connections is difficult when you have humans doing that work, right? Because this work takes a lot of emotional strength and emotional intelligence to be able to do it. So, unfortunately, this work and this movement has been, trigger points that have happened that make us do something. George Floyd was a huge trigger point. In the US, we can track other trigger points that happened in the media, or, an EEOC filing that was made. Something made you do this. But if there's not a lot of pressure on a regular basis, and if there's not a constant drumbeat to make sure that people are held accountable to make this human connection work continue, then we're going to struggle. But I think the important part here is to make sure that it doesn't, and Leela mentioned the term before, become so performative that you're just checking boxes to get things done and move on to the next thing, but you're building it into the essence, into the culture of an organization that makes sure that it doesn't become, we're waiting on the next tragedy to happen, but it just becomes a natural part of the everyday work that we actually do. So it's not surprising, but it's important for us, in positions that we have, and anyone else that's interested in doing this type of work, to keep that drumbeat going. We cannot let it stop. I always say, let's keep that same energy up, as if there are trigger moments that are happening on a daily basis.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I mean, this is, there is so much to be done. We've just started on the journey. And we barely laid the foundations. So there's much to be done. And hopefully people listening to the webinar will understand that it needs to be embedded within the DNA of the organization for it to actually, be sustainable and successful. Leela, what should be the priorities for the industry to fast track progress? Representation across protected characteristics, fair pay, role models, addressing organization culture. I think a lot of organizations don't know where to start. So, maybe you start with a DEI policy and you have a hire, and then you're confused because you're looking at other people and what they're doing. And probably you don't measure up, you're not that size, or you're too big, or you're too small. So, how should we prioritize, and what should we prioritize on?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to have a comprehensive plan when we do this work. So that was a huge part of our journey starting several years ago, is to really, the ambition for us to become the most inclusive agency in the world preceded 2020 by a good margin. But in terms of really formalizing how we were going to get there in a much more robust way, we really set out a comprehensive plan 2 years ago and have been tracking against those pillars. So first of all, I know it's easy to think, oh, we'll just do this one thing and start kind of simply, but I actually think that the starting place has to be more multifaceted and comprehensive than that, because there are so many different areas where we need to make progress. But maybe just to call out a few things. One, you have to have committed leadership. So that is one of the things that we are so fortunate to have. You know, our CEO, John Saunders, is the one who made the statement and put that ambition out there for all of us to aspire to try to become the most inclusive agency in the world. And he really means it. And he's not the only one, right? So that just makes a huge world of difference. And for those that are tuning in, to me, I think you can't do all of the other things unless you have that. And so really having leadership that is committed, and not just committed here and there, but committed in that kind of steadfast, ongoing, relentless way is absolutely essential. And especially now, a lot is being written about DE&I fatigue and how do you kind of keep up the momentum several years in. So again, you have to have leaders that are not just going to sort of say the right things or be there for a minute, but are going to kind of be committed to creating sustained progress. I think for our industry, one of the things we're thinking a lot is about how we can successfully transition people into the firm who are new to agency. So coming with different skill sets, but not necessarily agency experience. Maybe they were journalists, maybe they worked in the government sector, nonprofits, or education, or any number of things, or had in-house roles. How can we make sure those people have a successful on-ramp to FleishmanHillard? And that is not necessarily an easy task, but it's an absolutely important one, because if you look at the diversity of our industry, as you have well suggested, it's not that diverse. And so if we're just going and pulling people from each other's agencies, we're not going to be that effective. So we're spending a lot of time, I think, thinking about how we can do that well as we move forward. And I think that's a challenge to the whole industry that we need to do it if we're not going to achieve the goals that we want to achieve from a DE&I perspective without kind of getting that part of it right. And I really believe that's true. I think also it's about making sure that all people coming into the agency are part of this journey, so that the work of DE&I doesn't just fall to people who have who are from or members of marginalized communities. Adrianne can talk a little bit more about Project Open Door, but part of the ambition of that is to make sure that everyone coming into the firm has some level of DE&I commitment and fluency, and that is put out there early as something that we care immensely about, and that we're going to ask about it and hold people accountable to it, and that people's managers also appreciate and understand how they need to support people from diverse backgrounds within our agency. So those are, there's a long list of things we need to do, but those are a couple of things that we're putting particular attention to now.
And I think even beyond, FleishmanHillard, this work that we do is not competitive work, right? It's something that if agencies pull together, and FleishmanHillard led a group of DEI leaders from some of our competitive agencies within our industry, and all of our needs are very similar, right? We want to figure out ways to broaden the talent pool. And what does that look like? Because once they get in, we got so hyped and excited about, after George Floyd, again, that trigger point happened of bringing in diverse talent with transferable skills, but the investment in terms of making sure how their transferable skills related to the actual work that they would be doing, sometimes that became a disconnect, right? So I think one of the things that, we've been talking about from an industry standpoint, again, led by pulling these agencies together in one room to talk about it, is what can we create that's an industry standard that helps us all broaden the pool of talent that we all can contribute to. One agency alone, I don't think, has the bandwidth, and especially as we're moving into what's considered, a financial crisis time. I was about to call it a depression, but recession. As we move into this recession, this is the time, especially about the work that we do, that we pool our resources together, especially as it relates to developing talent, to enlarging the opportunity that we have to bring in more diverse voices and work together. So this is a pivotal time for us to do that.
That's good to hear from both of you about leadership commitment being the starting point for this. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it is work that needs to be continuously done. It's not something that it starts and finishes in a day. I think we'll be doing it for our lifetime to get where we want to. Adrianne, how important is it, Leela just spoke about your CEO's vision. How important is it for Fleischman to be the most inclusive organization in the world? And what is driving this ambition?
Yeah, it's imperative for us. It's our North Star. When Alfred Fleischman founded FleishmanHillard over 75 years ago now, he was committed to this space of inclusion, the space of creating opportunities for people to be able to communicate, although effectively communicate with each other, although they may have been from different backgrounds, had different point of views. But his idea and dream and focus was for those voices to be able to come together, be okay with having, it's okay to disagree, right? And having these conversations that allow us to come to one great point, but we can communicate together, agree to disagree, but still be able to move forward. He lived in that space of inclusion. I love to tell the story about how he was the president of the National Urban League, and that's a traditionally Black organization in the US. But as a Jewish man, he knew the advantage, the importance of bridging worlds together. And so he crossed lines to be able to create a space of inclusion and to learn more, put himself in an unfamiliar position to learn. So it's baked into our organization. It's a part of our DNA. The question of, what's driving this, it's the people, it's the leaders. We talked about, we had Alfred Fleischman, we have John Saunders now, and, he's one of those who lives that, my favorite motto of don't talk about it, be about it. He does that, right? And his voice is so powerful within the organization that it motivates all of us to be able to find ways to embed the spirit of inclusion within all the work that we do, because without it, we can't. And, we understand that it's an ever evolving thing, and we have to be very much aware. And once that we accomplish one thing, something's going to change. So being flexible and agile and being able to move with the times, whether it's, the new talent that's coming in and preparing them properly is going to be important. The reality is the only constant is change, right? So we have to be able to create opportunities and be open to the space of how can we constantly create ways and, again, be agile enough to let other people in. And I think that's the crust and core of what an inclusive environment is like and should be.
Yeah, this is this is so motivating and energizing to hear about your founder and your CEO. And I'll admit that I did not know about too much about them until before the webinar. I did a bit of research, but it's really beautiful to hear about how you can speak with authenticity and about this vision and this purpose that Fleischman has.
So I call myself, I didn't mean to interrupt, but you excited me with that. I traditionally call myself, an advocate, an activist, and a liberationist, right? And, it's always like empower to the people. How can we help change minds and thoughts? And to come to an organization, for me, to come to an organization like FleishmanHillard, it's about, it feels, I want to use the term like home, because it's baked into the organization. Leela mentioned we didn't start this journey, after George Floyd. It started before that. So for me to be able to come into an organization and then understand that the history, the very underpinnings of this organization was built on a spirit of inclusion, makes it feel more authentic. Do we have work to do? Absolutely. Again, everything is changing. We evolve. We have to be able to bob and weave and create opportunities for us to stay focused and stay on the mission. But for me to know that this organization was built with a solid foundation of inclusion and the spirit was there from the beginning, made it feel like that this was the right place for me to be at FleishmanHillard. It's a great time to be with this organization. It really is.
This is how awesome is it? Really beautiful. Leela, how does this translate into how you build your organization, engage with your employees and clients?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's a lot about the how. So I think a lot of what we think about is not having DE&I be siloed or be a side hustle. So really that ambition of trying to be the most inclusive organization in the world, like Adrianne was suggesting, it's about making it intrinsic to the organization. And that obviously is a journey, but it's making sure that it's embedded in everything that we do, right? That we're putting investment behind it on all levels, that everyone is embracing it as their responsibility. For example, this week we are hosting our DE&I summit. And yes, there's protected space for those that are DE&I leaders at the organization, of which there are many. But we also started the whole thing with an all agency day, reminding people of their integral role in what we're doing here. So that has to start internally, and that's true for the clients that we work with too. You have to start inside before you go out into the world, I think. And so that has been great to embody this, and really having a dedicated team with Adrianne at the helm, and really putting the investment behind it with people whose job it is to help advance this work and lead this work, but also rallying every single person at the organization to be a part of it has been so important. But, we also can't underscore enough the importance of how important it is to embed this at the center of our client work. I mean, that is the core of our business, right? Is the work that we do with clients. So we have the platform for impact that we have with our thousands of employees. That is really important, but we also have an incredible opportunity because we are the trusted partners for so many influential companies and organizations around the world. So that is where we can have exponential impact if we bring DE&I to the center of our client work. And I think one of the really smart and important things we've done is not to just have DE&I as a practice, and there are a few people working on it over here, but really treating diversity, equity, and inclusion as a core service. So our big passion and mission is to keep making inroads to make sure that our top clients at the firm are embedding DE&I at the center of the work. So it's not just thinking about, we're going to come in, we're going to do this project, then we're done. No, what is the strategy to making sure that we're bringing DE&I to the center of the work that we do? Because that, again, I think if we get that right, and we are making incredible progress there, which I'm really proud of, that I think is where we can have, impact on a scale that is, really even multitudes more, which is really exciting.
It's very interesting to hear this, because I was going to ask about, how clients have reacted. And you're mentioning that this is a critical thing for you at the agency, that you don't do it as a project and then disappear, but you're looking at, taking it across to the client and going the whole way with them. But have some of them, has it been easy? Have they responded well to what you're offering?
I don't think anything about this work is easy. So while I am a sunshine and roses kind of person, usually don't mistake that for the fact that this work is really, really hard. But I do think that there's been a lot of successes to celebrate. So that's a huge part of, I think, what we try to do. I've actually been really heartened. I mean, it was no surprise in 2020, I guess, to see, that we worked with more than 100 clients. That was incredible. I touched most of them personally, but we had a huge, incredible team. We now have 165 plus counselors around the globe who are part of True Mosaic, which is our global diversity, equity, and inclusion practice. So it's been pretty astounding. But the question was that level of momentum going to keep up? Like, what was year 2 going to look like? What will year 3 look like? And not to say we weren't doing this work before, but it obviously, as you were suggesting in your initial question, it's changed and there's become increased focus on this area. What's been really heartening to me as a person who cares deeply about this work is we're actually seeing our numbers grow, both in terms of like the scale of our client business, the percentage of clients within the firm that are bringing DE&I to the center of the work. And again, Adrianne was so right to say, we don't feel like we're all the way there yet. I want to see those numbers get to 100% and, grow and grow by multiples more. But some of the fear that I had coming out of 2020 in terms of, are people going to keep their foot on the gas pedal here? What's going to happen? At least in our organization, I think part of it is the way that we're approaching it and who we're approaching this work with. We haven't gone backwards. I do think we're going forwards, and we just need to keep up the momentum.
Yep. I think one of the things that I charge the team with is to, continuously be hunters, right? Find ways to bring in new opportunities and make the work that we have, and the initiatives that we have within True Mosaic a must-have for any of our clients. Leela alluded to the percentages that we have of, say, our top 200 clients, and that's growing, but that is because our team members are hunting, and they are even hunting even within, right? You have to be hunters to build this business, to grow it. And I think that's the beauty of it too, is DEI is a business. It's just not a must-have. It's an imperative. It's an integral part of the work that we do on a regular basis. So our team is made up of folks who see areas of opportunity to help their clients grow, to improve the human connection work that they can do within their organization. And they're converting. It's all about that conversion factor of how many clients internally that we have already in our coffers, and then what else can we bring in too.
Absolutely. I think DEI is no longer just a must-have, it's an imperative. It's a human rights issue. It's a social justice issue linked to the sustainable development goals. I think, where the ESG reporting becoming mandatory, with clients looking to, they need all the help that they can get. And I think it's good if they start recognizing the challenge that lies ahead of them. So moving on from there, this is a question that I ask people all the time, because I've seen a lot of ERGs in my time, Leela, and they are great, in terms for socializing and for meeting people and for meeting, people who may belong to a certain group. But I don't know how much power these groups have. So they're great for networking, socializing, to, help people to, feel included within a group. But I don't know whether these groups intersect, whether they have any powers to enable change. What is your experience?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've heard some rumblings from some people that, ERGs aren't really necessary, or do we really need to keep them? I maybe we'll arrive at a world at some point in the future where they don't serve a very important purpose. I don't think that we're there at this point today. I'll give a few examples of just things that I've seen as a member of ERGs at FleishmanHillard, and where I think we're making some really exciting inroads. So I'm sort of an ally member of our disability ERG, and the group collaborated on a resource, which is a neurodiversity guide. So a guide for how to support people who are neurodiverse. And everyone at any organization has team members, part of we say family with an FH sometimes. So we have members of the fam who are, who are neurodiverse, but it's not very well understood by people. And so that's something that the group collaborated on, has created a guide. There's an amazing platform called Lose the Whisper, where we have sessions available to all of our employees to kind of unpack topics that perhaps before people have been afraid to speak about. I just thought this guide was something that is extremely tangible and useful for people, because again, many people are neurodiverse, but there are also people who don't understand it very well. And with this guide, I think can learn and be equipped to better understand that community. So that's one example. And then I just really wouldn't underestimate how important it is from a community and just a personal perspective. So I will give a personal example. When the school shooting happened in Uvalde, Texas, and the parent of two, our ERG came together with a professional resource person to help talk through how to address this horrible tragedy with our children. And I actually was on PTO at the time, but I dialed in for it because it was something that I was really troubled by, and not to say that parents weren't troubled by it. And we do keep our ERGs open to not only people who identify with that community, but people who are allies or just want to be supportive of that community. That was incredibly useful, powerful offering to me that day that I don't know if I would have had the same way outside of work. So I guess I wouldn't underestimate also some of the things where it's easy to say, oh, yeah, I know it's good for the relationships or the community. Like those things are integral to how we are actually an inclusive organization. So I have both seen the power of ERGs to create kind of real resources that can be taken up and used, and also felt personally, I think, the power that can come just from having a community of people that are, you're going through life together with and working life together with.
Yeah, no, I must clarify that I definitely believe in ERGs. It's just that I think that we do not give them sufficient power to enable change or to speak up, and we don't consider intersecting identities. So I don't see a lot of collaboration amongst the ERGs. They tend to be in silos, and often that can be a challenge. Adrianne, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, check to both things that you both have said. But one of the things that I found too with ERGs is it gives them an opportunity to feel represented within the organization, especially if they are used correctly. I think I heard the phrase recently, nothing about us without us, right? And if we tap into the ERGs to get a sense of information, how do you want to be represented in this particular space? We use them to be credible cultural counselors on issues that other folks may not be, as versed on. So I think there's an opportunity there. And, honestly, more investments have to be made. Budgets have to be given to ERGs because it does take time. It is in some cases actual work that they're doing to benefit the organization. So in that vein, I think the opportunity for growth comes with investment into ERGs but just really visually seeing and understanding that the contributions that can be made is just perspective. That inclusive nature of who these organizations are, who they represent, and their voice is so powerful. And to be able to have them as an organizational resource, not just for them, but for the organization, for us to tap into as a learning opportunity for us to utilize when issues come up that everyone may not have keen insight into.
Agree with what both of you have said. What does it mean to create a culture of belonging, especially in a world that's constantly in a state of flux? We've been waiting for things to go back to normal, whatever that means. And does it require you to start with, inclusion before diversity or diversity or representation? Who would like to go on this?
I'm happy to start, but I'm sure Adrianne will have a lot to add. I think that they have to be done in concert, but I think it is really important to treat each one individually. So I think one of the really important things we've done is to do an annual survey to see how we're tracking on different dimensions of DE&I, and we don't lump them all together. I think the understanding coming through the survey is really to understand that these things are each distinct, and so they need to be looked at in concert. I don't I don't think we'll be successful if we just look at inclusion but not diversity, or vice versa. So I think they need to be done concurrently. I have found, it's been amazing to me, I think, just that some of the most kind of career defining and life defining work that I've ever had an opportunity to be a part of has happened during this amazing state of flux that we have been in, really tumultuous times. And yet, True Mosaic, which is the kind of global DE&I practice that we've built, I mentioned we've worked with more than 100 clients. We have more than 165 counselors now. But more than that, it is one of the most special communities I've ever been a part of. And I actually think some of the push to kind of remote work and us being able to come together like this in ways that maybe was less common before has actually been incredibly important, getting back to the important point you made before in terms of, kind of bringing together intersectional identities. Like, I have loved that, when that group comes together, it is powerful because, you get on and, True Mosaic, like that is the name for a reason, because you get on and you see the Hollywood squares of people, and it looks like a mosaic that is reflective of the actual world that we live in. And that is so powerful and so amazing. And so I would just say some of these opportunities and like just the platforms, the connections that we can build across geographies, across different demographics and facets of diversity, that has accelerated so much as a result of the tumultuous times. So there's been so many hard things about the past few years, and yet there's also been a lot of beauty in it, and a lot of very authentic, deep connection and sort of shared learning and shared experience that has been built in a way that I hadn't seen before in my career or my life. So I think that is really heartening in terms of, what we have the ability to do moving forward.
Yeah, and to get to the kind of core of the question of, how do you prioritize? My answer is it depends. Where are you in the world? What does it, how, does it affect you? If you're in EMEA, DE&I means one thing. They don't think they have a diversity problem. It may be inclusion. It may be equity. We just did an amazing study in AIPAC where we unpacked, what it means in AIPAC. What does DE&I mean? How does it translate into their everyday lives and conversations, which may be very different from what happens in the UK and the US. So I think the elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and a B for belonging, and now, we're adding an A for accountability. It really depends on where you are in the world and the culture that you live by. So we can have, what I call globally consistent standards on DE&I, AB, but it also has to be locally relevant to that individual space. So I may have my hunches on equity, and that's what it means to me right now. But again, depending on where you are in the world, even within the US, what city, what place do you live in, based off of the cultural makeup, something else may take the lead. But I think if everyone has the mandate and passion that human connective business of making sure that all of our needs are being met in some kind of way, then they find some relevance. But as long as, it may be diversity, it may be inclusion, it may have this, moving bar, but as long as we are focused on one of the 4 or 5 pieces of it, it helps. So just be mindful that it can mean something different everywhere. As long as we're tapping into what fits for the culture is super important.
I have so many things to say and so many points to share, on how, the last 2.5 years have been so positive. But because Adrianne was talking about, localized understanding, I'll move to this, the next question, because it segues neatly into what you were saying, Adrianne, about cultural intelligence. how important a skill is it for current and future leaders and employees also, actually? And why do you think it is important?
Yeah, I am so glad I started my career outside of the United States. I think it's really important to remember that DE&I is a global, challenge, opportunity, and it doesn't look the same everywhere, as Adrianne rightly pointed out, but there are issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion everywhere. And I do think, you hear about some people, I think, feeling like this has been a more of a US-centric movement. And yet I'm so glad that I started my career in 6 countries in Asia working on issues of equity and inclusion, because I know that while these issues aren't the same everywhere, that they do absolutely deeply exist. And I think it's just changed my whole mentality now as kind of a global leader. Like, it's easy to say you have kind of a global role or you have a global, a global position. But that experience of actually living somewhere else, working somewhere else is so important to really understand and shape your perspective in a more kind of nuanced way. So I think it's so important. I mean, our world is diverse. It will become increasingly diverse. And so I think you can't underestimate the importance of having a high cultural understanding, and how you get there requires a lot of intention, I think, and a dedicated effort.
No, I would just say I just agree, kind of with all of those statements that Leela said. I don't have much to add. Travel and being able to work in other places is like the gateway to everything, the gateway of understanding. So as much as we can, provide opportunities, even as individuals, where are you vacationing? Where are you going? Who and what are you learning about? And if you can't go to that place, pick up a book and read it, tap into a podcast, into a space that's other than what you are accustomed to, but it definitely provides a growth moment and growth trajectory that gives you more of a global mindset, and just impacts your ability to lead globally, because you've talked to the people, you've felt what it means and what their issues are. So you can tap into it, and you have a resource that if you had not had exposure to it, if you had not had access to it, and then more importantly, if people hadn't had access to you to understand what your own perspective is, and you haven't helped them grow, I think is, going to be important. So it's all good, absolutely. We have to have that perspective to make us better counselors.
And by the way, you can do that in your own backyard too. I mean, I grew up as the daughter of a Unitarian Universalist minister. And one of the things that I was so happy that my dad made me do is that we would go to other places of worship and really understand all of the world religions. You can do that, no matter where you live. You can go to communities that might be very different from what you've experienced without having to get on an airplane. So it doesn't have to be hugely cost intensive. It is something you, I think, can build into your kind of everyday life as well. And that, I think, is also important as we're thinking about cultural understanding too. It's within borders as well as across borders, I think.
It's so beautiful to hear stories. And I'm not plugging anyone in, but if you know of Pame Bassi, who is, I think, the talent lead at Kraft Heinz. And
I do. We're on the National Advisory Board at Stanford's Haas Center for Public Service together. She was the chair. She just rolled off, and I became vice chair this year. So small world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, because of 52 weeks of worship. Is about that and about her learning. It's awesome actually to hear, of cultural intelligence through learnings and stories and experiences. How awesome is this?
She is an exceptional person.
She is an exceptional person. I had her on my podcast, fortunately, and I think aside, we can discuss that later. But we're at the last question. Her time has really flown. So Adrianne, at Fleischman, how are you measuring progress And how are you ensuring accountability? So I've heard from both of you about how committed the leadership is, but what are the standards that you're setting for yourself, and how do you know, what the impact has been year on year, or, if you can't do it year on year, this is my 5-year thing, and this is how we are progressing on that.
Yeah, one of the things that we have recently engaged in is an audit. We have to understand who we are foundationally as an organization, and how we implement our processes, and how do we become consistent with who we say we are. We have a standard press statement that we make, but the reality is, are we doing the work that we say that we're doing, right? Are we living up to the policies and practices that we say we have out in the press? Are we as authentic as we say we are? So recently we had an organization come in and essentially do like a cultural audit, with us. LCW came in, and we formed this partnership, and what they did was they conducted really like a comprehensive audit of who we were, what our culture looked like, what our people systems, including like focus groups and key leadership interviews, and what that looked like in terms of the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy. What did that look like? How was our training roadmap for the organization? All of those things became important, and those were some of the things that they evaluated. And what they did was to provide us, some key findings and recommendations that were multi-layered in terms of the approach as it relates to strategy and learning, and that was tailored, for our stakeholder groups, including our leaders, our line managers, and as well as individual contributors. And I think, that evaluation really kind of gives us a look in terms of next steps. It proved, initially that from a practical standpoint, from a policy standpoint, we have some sense of stability. But like any or other organization, we have to strengthen that muscle. We have to keep building, and we have to keep doing the work on a regular basis. I think I mentioned earlier about keeping a constant drumbeat, right? And that's what has to happen. And so things like that, like having an audit by an organization like LCW, who would come in and take a look at us, that's beyond some of the surveys that we do, where we do employee engagement surveys, or we do have various conversations to get at the core of who we are. When you have an opportunity to do an audit like that, and you hear the voices, the real, you just don't see the stats. I think that's what's important, because you actually can hear and feel what the people are saying. And it has such a large impact in terms of how we can now shape and structure what the organization does and how we move forward. So those are some key elements that don't only take a look at the data, but it looks at the culture of the organization. Yeah. It looks at, how do we gel as human beings? Again, that human connection part of the business. What are people saying, thinking, and feeling? And, if it matches up with the policies that we have in place. So I think that's one of the things, and it's imperative. You can't be something and not truly authentically know who you are, so you don't understand what your gaps might be. And having an audit like that is something that helps us fill the gaps, understand what we need to do, and things we need to put in place, initiatives that'll help us grow and structure. And if we need to pivot, identify what that pivot looks like. It's imperative. It's everything. And if an organization wants to be strong and wants to lead the pack in terms of providing the ability for their client teams to be credible counselors, they have to know who they are as an organization from the foundation.
Well, that sounds, that is so true, on the accountability piece, on getting in a third party to actually go through things. And, talking about it yourself or running stuff yourself is great, but I think in terms of just credibility also, it adds to that credibility piece. Leela, any last words on this?
No, just that I mean, I really even appreciate this platform, right? I mean, it's not just, we're obviously honored to have received the award, but the fact that there's this platform to kind of share what we're learning and also to learn from others, like that's what it's all about, right? Like we will have some successes, but we also have to have a growth mindset about this work that we're doing and be able to be honest when something isn't working or we need to do something better. So I just think that's a huge part of the commitment, the shared commitment that we need to have as we move forward. So I just really appreciate you having this conversation with us. It's clear you really get it. So thanks for all the good questions and for the opportunity.
No, I really enjoyed speaking to the both of you and learning so much about, you know, the incredible work that you're doing. It's been enlightening. It's been, yeah, it's been so interesting. I think we could go on for a couple of hours, but in the interest, it's just a webinar, so we need to cut time, you know, make it short and sweet. It isn't that short. So thank you. I'd just like to thank you both for being here and giving up your time for this wonderful, enlightening conversation. And I'm sure, you know, when we put out this webinar, people will find it of great value and come back with questions or, you know, their own stories about this.
Thank you so much.